Hello and welcome back to Pin My Podfics. This will be the reading of After the Fall by Innocent_reader with one N. Chapter 10, A Home Awaits, Part 1 and 2. It's been a while since I recorded a chapter of this fic. Since I pre-recorded a lot, but I'm running out, so I'm recording this one. Anyway, so the note says, Alfred Pennyworth is the best character in the Batverse, and I hope I have done justice to his greatness. I agree. Anyways, now on to the chapter. Chapter 10, A Home Awaits. Part 1, POV, Alfred. Wing Manor was drowned in a silence too thick, almost unnatural. Not the comfortable hush of lazy mornings when sunlight slipped through the curtains carrying the promise of another day in familiar routines, nor the quiet of midnight broken only by the ticking of the old hallway clock, but the heavier silence, dense and suffocating, the kind that clung to walls and furniture, the silence of a house that had lost its soul. The echo of Alfred's footsteps rang too loudly throughout the corridors. If the manor itself had forgotten how to welcome voices, the walls, once witnesses of laughter and arguments, now answered with nothing but stillness, thick as fog. Even the creak of the floorboards under his feet sounded different, slower, almost mournful. He stopped for a moment before one of the great stained glass windows in the hall, where the morning light spilled in blue tones. There was no one left to admire the play of colors across the floor. A sharp ache tightened in his chest. The whole house seemed to be waiting for something, or for someone, as though the rooms, the furniture, even the air trapped in the corridors for years sighed with him. Steam rose, fogging the glass of the kitchen window as Alfred himself drifted into a brief daydream. He gazed at the grounds beyond, vast and seemingly untouched. How many times had he watched Bruce crossing the same lawn, moving like a shadow, training himself past the limits of endurance? How many times had he seen young Dick flipping and tumbling, laughing at his own failures before rising to try again? Now the lawn was only grass, green, indifferent, untouched by absence. Beyond the walls, the world burned. He lifted the teacup to his lips, the warmth spreading through his throat and chest, though it did little to chase away the shadow rooted there. Carrying the cup, Alfred entered the main room, quietly lit a lamp, and, with a restrained sigh, turned on the television. Images exploded across the screen. Smoke rising from cities left unrecognizable, fallen monuments, makeshift quarantine zones, masses of people fleeing, children crying, mothers screaming, men with rifles trying in vain to impose order where none remained. The anchor's trembling voices repeated the questions echoing across the globe. What will come of the Justice League? Alfred switched it off after only a few seconds. He didn't need the answer. He already knew. Bruce's absence was a void impossible to name. Not just an employer, not just a hero. He had been a son, a partner, a life's mission. Clark, Diana, John, Arthur, all gone, dead, or lost beyond reach. A world without its gods. Gotham without its Dark Knight. The black screen reflected Alfred's face back at him, deeper wrinkles than he remembered, thinning air, his shoulders no longer able to bear the weight they once had. The last adult, he thought, and the irony almost made him smile. Never in his life had he imagined himself as the anchor for youth. And yet, that was exactly what he had become. Dick, only 13, to Alfred's eyes, still the boy who had needed rocking through nights of nightmares, who sought approval in every drill, who forced a smile even after he fell. Now forced to wear not only the mask, but also a burden heavy enough to crush grown men. Even from afar, Alfred could see how the boy had straightened his shoulders, hardened his gaze, swallowed his tears so the others wouldn't falter. Wally, 15, always running, always laughing, always hiding his own fears behind jokes. Alfred knew him well enough to see the truth. That beneath the restless energy was a vulnerable heart, and now he ran endlessly, as if afraid that stopping meant being consumed by grief he refused to face. And the newcomer, Midoriya, 16, but a stranger in every way. Separated from his homeland, his friends, even his culture, fighting beside strangers for a world that wasn't even his own. Alfred had never had the chance to know him deeply, but it didn't take long to understand the boy burned himself, literally, for the sake of those he barely knew. His spirit was clear to anyone who looked. Someone who chose every day to shoulder the burden never meant for him, yet bore it anyway. Roy, Satana, so young, so scarred, children, molded by loss, turned into soldiers far too soon. Alfred closed his eyes for a moment, breathing heavily, letting his own breath echo through the emptiness of the manor. The air smelled of old wood, fresh tea, and memories that would never burn, never return. All of them teenagers who should have been living their youth, yet sacrificed every second to protect others, refusing to stop, refusing to cry, because they knew if they did, the world itself would crumble. They pressed forward not out of coldness, but because they felt too much. And he, Alfred Pennyworth, was the last adult left within reach, the last who could remind them that before being heroes, they were still human, that they deserved to rest, to smile, to make mistakes, that despite everything, they still had the right to simply be kids. He opened his eyes. The gray sky weighed heavy over Gotham. The silence still clung, thick and unyielding, but Alfred no longer feared it. Not anymore, because he knew they would return, wounded, tired, exhausted, but alive. And when they did, they would need someone to remind them of who they were, and that there was still a home waiting for them. That even in the deepest dark, hope still remained. Now moving on to chapter 10, A Home Awaits, part 2. Alfred walked slowly through the halls of Wayne Manor, and each step made the wooden floor creak softly, as if the house itself remembered those who had once passed through. The sound echoed between silent walls, carrying a weight that went beyond emptiness. They were still vessels of old voices that insisted on remaining. Dust that gathered upon furniture once immaculate, subtle marks of abandonment in place that, though grand, now seemed like a mausoleum of memories. In the paintings and stained glass, shadows stretched, reminding him of nights when the manor pulsed with life. Bruce's sharp commands, the noise of training in the underground, the brief, timid laughter of Dick, and rare moments of rest. Now the silence was almost sepulchral, heavy, so dense it seemed to press the air against his chest. With each room he crossed, Alfred felt as though he walked a fine line between present and past. where the ghosts were not seen, but felt in every detail. Alfred stopped before the closed door of the movie room, and for a moment hesitated before entering. He pushed it open slowly, and the soft groan of the wood was swallowed by the silence of the room. The aligned armchairs, the darkened screen at the front, everything seemed frozen in time. But for Alfred, the space would never just be a projection room. It was one of the few places where Bruce and Dick had shared truly simple moments. He remembered one night in particular, Bruce still wearing his usual austere expression, but without the Batman suit, and sat in the back of the room with the boy. There had been no speeches, no hidden lessons, only an old film projection on the screen, and a comfortable silence that Alfred had only ever seen exist between father and son. Dick, laughing softly at certain scenes, ventured comments that broke Bruce's habitual rigidity, and Bruce, though restrained, let small signs escape. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, or the way he inclined his head toward the boy, as if absorbing the instant with the intensity of someone who knew such moments would be rare. Alfred back then had watched from afar, content. To him the movie room was more than a refuge. It was proof that even amid darkness, Bruce still allowed the boy he had chosen as his ward to be just that, a boy. Now, staring at the empty rows, Alfred felt a stab of pain. The dark screen reflected back only silence, and the echo of memory was more vivid than any projection could ever. He drew a deep breath, as though the still air of that room were heavier than usual, and closed the door gently. The sound echoed through the manor like a farewell, and he resumed his slow steps from the halls. Alfred pushed open the door of the library, and the soft creak of the hinges sounded louder than it should in that silence. The air inside carried a different weight, steeped in dust, and the old wood of shelves that rose to the ceiling. It was a solemn room, a refuge of knowledge, but also a stage of moments he would rather not revisit. His eyes fell upon the old leather couch, still marked by use. It was there that, years ago, he had found Dick after one of his first missions alongside Batman. The boy had been curled up, the mask barely removed from his face. The cape fallen to the ground as if it had been too heavy to carry. He trembled almost imperceptibly, but enough for Alfred with his experience to notice at once. On the boy's lap rested an adventure book. Pages lay open, but Dick's fixed eyes were never moved beyond the same line. He clutched the volume tightly, as if those pages could anchor him to something normal, childish, human. Alfred remembered the uncomfortable feeling that had consumed him seeing him like that. The contrast between the colorful fantasy printed in words and the empty gaze of a boy who had already seen it up close. How cruel reality could be. That night, without saying a word, Alfred had sat beside him. He had offered no advice, no speeches. He had simply stayed there, in silence, until the tremor in Dick's shoulders slowly faded. Only then did he calmly tell him a story, not about justice or vengeance, but about simple bravery, that of keeping on, walking even when your feet want to stop. Now, looking at that same empty couch, Alfred felt his heart tighten. The boy who once needed to cling to adventure books to remember he was still a child was the same one who led others through a world with no pages to turn, only shadows to cross. Dick, at only 13, bearing on his shoulders, had no grown what no grown man should have to carry, let alone a boy. And he was not alone in that burden. Wally. Alfred rested one hand on the back of the couch, gazing out the window. Wally, always so vibrant, so restless, now ran more than ever, not to escape, but to keep helping, to keep others from falling. But deep down, Alfred knew that the knowledge pressed painfully against his chest that the boy hadn't even stopped to seek news of his own family. Mrs. Iris, his parents, perhaps they were alive, perhaps not, and Wally faithful to what had been taught, faithful to what Barry had instilled in him. Always run to help others, even if it costs you. Simply kept running without even allowing himself to look back. It was a silent sacrifice, perhaps unconscious but brutal. Alfred closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of it all. Midoriya, too, a foreigner in a world not his own, fighting with the same determination as the others, as if he were not just a lost boy. Roy, Satana, each with their own griefs, their own losses, which they kept to themselves like invisible scars, all of them united by a terrible choice to ignore their own mourning, to smother despair so that others might have a chance to survive. And he, the only adult left, the only one who could see clearly how much it consumed them, even if they did not notice or refuse to. Alfred lifted his gaze to the portrait of Thomas and Martha Wayne hanging on the wall. What could he do? The question lingered in his mind, cold and inevitable. And then, almost without realizing, he whispered into the emptiness. Remind them that they are still human. Yes, that would be his role. He could not stop them from fighting. They would never accept that, but he could ensure that at the end of each battle, they still had somewhere to return to, and a reason to remain in more than mere symbols. They were young, they were human, and he, Alfred Pennyworth, was the adult there. He would not let them forget it. Gosh, that was it for chapter 10, A Home Awaits of After the Fall by Innocent with underscore reader. This is only half of the chapter. Like, if you can see like the progress bar or whatever, it's only half of the chapter, like on AO3. So like, gosh, intense emotions. I got no time, so like I need to go real quick. Yeah. My parents are gonna come home, and yeah. So hope you enjoyed this. Of course, check out the original author, Innocent with on and underscore reader. So yeah, hope you like this and all that. Kudos and all that. Yeah. Bye.